Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Seer session. I'm delighted to welcome our partners and friends from Vertex onto today's call. It continues to be a very volatile world from a trade and financial perspective, and Vertex have got some fantastic tools for navigating taxation, and all of the associated complexities. I will hand over to yourself, Deb.
Thank you so much, Rufus. Really appreciate it. And for those of you joining us, thank you for those of you joining us again, and welcome. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we appreciate you spending the time with us for this half hour. We're going to talk today about some of the complexities in terms of our approach to AR and AP in the global sales and use tax arena. With me today, I have a few of my teammates. Pat Esposito is our Director of Partner Strategy for the Microsoft practice. In addition, I'm Deb Funstein. I own the Global Day-to-Day Operation Partnership. We have James Karst with us, who is our Global Technical Manager and our Global Technical Lead and our tax expert. And Jess Kressinger, who is one of our Global Channel Sales Managers. So we welcome you today. A little bit about what we're going to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about who's Vertex. We'll talk about some of the global challenges in terms of driving the need for automation through your tax. We'll talk a little bit about how to justify it, both from the lens of if you're a customer or if you're a partner with customers that might have some needs within tax, how to identify what those are and how to justify the needs. And then our end-to-end solution. James will talk about a lot of that. And then at the end, we'll kick back over to Jess and we'll talk about where you can find us in the next few weeks. And we'll leave the end for some Q&A. So with that, I will kick it over to Jess.
Thanks, Deb. And, one of the things we wanted to kind of set the table with is a little bit about who we are if you haven't had the experience of working with us previously. I love this slide because, 45 years of building epic trust, one partnership at a time, isn't just something that we talk about internally. It's really something we put into practice. I'm going to be going on my 1-year anniversary here at Vertex, but that'll mark 10 years in this space. And I have to say that, I see this every day in practice from the team here at Vertex in terms of how we value our partnerships and really the work that we do to ensure that we're taking as good a care of our partnerships and their customers as well as our own on a daily basis. So just a couple of things that I think are important to lay the foundation of who we are. First is you'll notice a statistic when we talk about ourselves is that we own over 60% of the Fortune 500 use Vertex products. So I've even, as we're recording this, used one of our customers today to buy a couple of things that I needed delivered before I leave town tomorrow. So you can imagine the folks that we're working with from a tax perspective. The reason we bring this up is because, not necessarily that we like to brag, although we're proud of our customers. It's really about that establishing establishing how we go to market and the things that we're doing internally to ensure that our customers are as well taken care of as possible. So, if we are supporting the biggest names in the world in terms of retail and manufacturing, and the list goes on and on and on, they're driving the needs that we have to put into our products, right? They're telling us these are the things that are coming up in our world that we have to be able to overcome. And then we are taking that back and making sure it's in the product. So even if you as a partner are thinking to yourself, well, I don't work with these giant companies, that's okay. They still get the benefit of all of that work that's being done to ensure that commerce continues with tax provided. So it's a big deal for us. And we ensure that we're pushing that to all of our customers, no matter the size that they are. You'll know, you've probably heard of us from a global perspective. We support over 195 countries, which in a global economy is extremely important, especially with a lot of things that are going on that are impacting global economies right now. So it's a great opportunity to be able to support customers regardless of where they are. And the other thing I wanted to mention is we are publicly traded. I think it's important because it means that we have to adhere to a very high standard of our internal and external practices when it comes to our customers and the work that we do with them. So, as you're thinking about who to trust with your clients as you think about these projects that may involve tax. Just know that the work is being done on our end to ensure that we are that trustworthy of a partner for you going forward. Next slide, Deb, if you wouldn't mind. Awesome. So I mentioned this a little bit on the earlier slide, but just to kind of tie this back to the Microsoft ecosystem, which is where I've lived for longer than I want to admit to in terms of time. But Vertex as an organization has been around for over 45 years. So you can imagine the amount of changes in technology and tax and anything you can imagine have happened. We weathered those storms along with you through those times. So, this is really an organization that was built to ensure help and compliance when it comes to indirect tax for our client bases. And that continues on to today. So we're going to talk specifically about the ecosystem around D365 and Dynamics. But we are supporting customers across multiple platforms. So as your customers grow and emerge in different areas, know that we're supporting them with that longevity that we have in market. Next slide. Awesome. So specifically talking about Microsoft, this is a key partnership for us at Vertex. We are not only a customer of Microsoft, but they are also a customer of ours. So Microsoft utilizes our technology within their organization. So if you are on, AppSource or different elements within the Microsoft ecosystem, chances are you've had tax calculated by Vertex. And the very cool thing about that is that because of this partnership, we are constantly working together to ensure that we are leveraging the Microsoft technology in the best ways possible. What that means for your customers and your projects is that our hope is that your customers can utilize the technology that they're purchasing through you in the best way possible, in the exact way they want to, without us disrupting that process. So we're constantly working in conjunction with our Microsoft teams to make sure, right, that we're staying not only in compliance with the different products that they're releasing, their updates and things like that, that those are coming out on time, but also that as the technology changes or that new products emerge like Copilot and AI and things like that, that we're staying cutting edge when it comes to those technologies too. So this partnership is extremely important. Again, we go back to that conversation around trust. Microsoft trusts us, we trust them with a lot of elements in our own ecosystem. So know that this is definitely a product line that is quintessential to the success of Vertex. And through that, we hope to be able to support you and your customers as well as possible with that relationship.
Yeah, just I can take it over from,
Awesome. Yeah,
from this slide here. Yeah, so as she was, as Jess was just mentioning, right, our ISV partnership with Microsoft. So what that really means is that, within the different Dynamics platforms, we have, pre-built integrations to, all of them for indirect tax. So D365 Finance, Commerce, Business Central, Sales, and even the new framework, the tax calculation, for D365 Finance, all work in a similar fashion, but are ultimately comprehensive indirect tax integrations that work real time with our flagship solution called Vertex O Series. So ultimately, as you process orders through these platforms, it's calling out to our Vertex system to calculate those sales taxes and use taxes as well as VAT on the fly, and then pushing them back into the source system. So that for your customers, what's the right tax to charge, and then also for your purchases, what's the right tax that you need to be paying. These are long-standing integrations that have actually evolved all the way from our legacy platforms like AX and GP into what we have today. But we also still offer those GP and AX solutions because we continue to see customers that are on those platforms and still need automation for indirect tax. So just kind of transitioning into the next section here, which is really just providing thought leadership around, what's changing across the different, tax jurisdictions that is impacting, your indirect tax processes and things that you need to really have a handle on as you manage that internally. So, these 5 things are really, things that we see that are changing, and organizations really, sometimes are overlooking. And it's important to make sure that you're aware of these and you have either a process in place today or looking at processes so that you can make sure that you can remain compliant going forward. So on the left-hand side, just starting with Wayfair, this has been something we've talked about for some time. It really was established in 2018. It gave authority to the United States and the states within the union to require you to register and collect tax in their states, even if you don't have physical presence. And we see, in fact, Jess and I were just talking to a small organization a few months ago who was historically, really selling to one state, and physically within that state. They enabled an online, website, and ultimately, overnight started selling into multiple states and started hitting these economic thresholds without knowing that, right? So fast forward 2 or 3 years, they all of a sudden found themselves under an audit, and those auditors were looking back all the way back to 2018, ensuring that they pay back the historical tax that they didn't collect. So that can come at a big surprise for companies that make a decision to all of a sudden go online, but are not thinking about their indirect tax processes and what impact that might have, there. So ensure that you're aware of those Wayfair rules and their economic nexus, thresholds. Second thing is the digital goods and services. So historically, these are non-taxable. So we find companies are kind of used to that ruling and therefore not prioritizing the tax systems and processes. But as technology has evolved, we all know that we consume a lot of our goods and services digitally and not necessarily physically. And states are losing out on a lot of that revenue. So over the last 3 years or so, they've really had a transition in their tax laws where they begin to tax more of those digital goods and services. So something you want to make sure you're staying on top of. Marketplace, if you're selling through marketplaces, sometimes the natural reaction is to think that you can avoid these tax laws and rules. And most states have kind of taken a position where they're holding the marketplace accountable to make sure that they collect and remit the right taxes. But however, the seller is still responsible to report their taxes so they can reconcile and make sure that they're complete. So make sure if you are selling through marketplaces, you're aware of those laws because they can vary by state. And then also make sure you're complying, if anything, at least with the reporting requirements. Sales tax holidays, especially with the inflation that we've seen across our economy, some local governments are looking to provide relief to their consumers there. So they're imposing more tax holidays than maybe they have before. This can be difficult for a tax team or even a system to be able to handle these because they can be turned on almost at any time, and the duration is usually pretty short. So you need to be monitoring these and have a way to enforce them through your system, and then also be able to quickly turn them off. And then state and jurisdiction changes, of course, these are changing all the time across the U.S. But something we've seen recently are the imposition of environmental fees, especially in Colorado and Minnesota, where if you're selling to that state and you're charging for shipping, you now are required to enforce a fee as part of your indirect tax. And that fee is not a typical, charge a certain percentage to a revenue amount. It's a static fee. So it becomes a little bit more difficult for native systems to be able to calculate those taxes. So these things here really are U.S. related complex or changes that are happening. And the next slide we'll go to here is talking about our global changes as well. So when we look at the global changes, which is really your VAT countries, what are the different things that are taking effect there that are impacting indirect tax that we want to make sure that you all are aware of? The first one is probably the most common, most popular thing talked about right now is the invoicing requirements, where countries are looking to enforce companies to report in real time via electronic files their invoices, right? So they want you to share your data, share your transactions in real time via electronic method. Business to business businesses. So if you're doing B2B and you're selling across Europe, you definitely want to be looking at these mandates and the electronic formats that are required. And you should be looking at infrastructure that you can put in place that's going to allow you to support those going forward. So that's not something that even if you choose with a manual process you can really accommodate. But there are platforms out there, including Vertex, obviously, that can help streamline the e-invoicing reporting and meeting those requirements. And then digital taxation, very similar to the U.S., right? VAT and the countries are realizing a lot of goods now are consumed digitally, which historically are not always taxed. So those laws are changing. And then third but not least is our global trade, right? The recent announcements of tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs that we're seeing between different countries is certainly making companies think differently and look to decide how should they react to those tariffs, which those natively are a direct tax, right? So tariffs are something as you receive goods as a business into your country, imports, you need to pay those tariffs upfront to the federal government. Those are different than necessarily what Vertex helps with directly. However, how you react to those tariffs can absolutely impact your indirect tax processes and footprint. And that's what we're going to talk about here next, is making sure that you're aware of the changes you may be putting in place, how those might relate to indirect taxes, and ensuring that your indirect tax team and processes have a voice to make sure they're prepared for that. So just a little bit more into that. We touched this last time with our previous Seer webinar, but really wanted to visit this again because we felt like it's relevant as you look to managing those global changes, making sure you're aware of how those changes are going to impact your indirect tax processes. The tariffs and how companies are going to react to those is absolutely a catalyst for that. So what we're seeing is as a result of these tariffs, companies really looking to do one or maybe a combination of three different things, right? Inventory strategies. So maybe they look at operating lean if they want to minimize what they're buying and importing, or maybe they look at stockpiling. So they're going to actually buy. They're anticipating more tariffs, so they want to buy upfront. Pricing strategies, obviously they want to maintain their margins, so they look at either passing some of these costs on to their consumers, or they look at getting creative with their pricing strategies so that they can hide some of those costs and ultimately maintain their margins. And then last but not least, supply chain, which is probably what every company is looking at doing. How can we reconsider where and who they buy from, right, and how they fulfill? So rather than importing goods, maybe they look at using drop ship vendors to actually fulfill for their products. They may look at buying domestically rather than internationally, right? And so if you go from an organization that's used to buying from one or two vendors from the same country, you have a tax process that's set up that's very specific to that, right? And if you change your supply chain where now you're introducing multiple countries that you're sourcing from, multiple new vendors, you need to make sure that your indirect tax processes can handle that and scale with that, because as you change where and who you're buying from, there's absolutely a change on the indirect taxes that you need to be able to calculate and pay your vendors. All right, just transitioning into, so hopefully you can kind of see some of those impacts, things to look out for in terms of changes that are happening that you may be overlooking. And we wanted to also recognize triggers for automation. So just kind of at a high level, what are some of the things that we see that are causing our customers to look into automating their indirect tax? And regulatory change is really the obvious one. So the more regions that they're selling to, the more jurisdictions and tax authorities that they're dealing with, those are always changing their tax laws. So it becomes very difficult, again, the more regions you're selling through, to keep up with those changes. But also you may have a business that's has aspirations to grow, and likely if they're going to grow, they're going to either increase where they're selling to, or maybe increase what they're selling. They might begin to sell into new industries, new markets, and therefore to support that business growth, you need to make sure that your indirect tax processes are, scalable, whether that be, with your manual processes or through, automation. Audit preparedness is one that, a lot of times gets overlooked. Some companies may not have been through a difficult audit, but it is usually a matter of time, right? And once you've gone through those audits, you may realize you don't have the adequate records, the access to the data that you need. It may be in disparate systems, right? One of the benefits of tax automation is that you're consolidating that into, one system, and you're using a system that's built to defend those audits. So then you have that data available to you, and it's in the right formats to support your audits. And the thing is, if you're under audit, you may have done everything correctly, but if you can't provide the data that proves that, you're still obligated to back pay those taxes, right? So it becomes extremely critical, not just to make sure your internal processes are calculating the right thing, but making sure you have access to all of that proper data. And then consolidating tax policy, we see all the time now. Our organizations and customers are not just using one or two platforms. They may actually have a combination of multiple ERPs. They likely will have an e-commerce platform, a point of sale platform, and it becomes really difficult to consolidate your tax policy and enforce it across multiple technical systems. So with automation, you're really doing that. You're corralling everything to work through the one system, which is Vertex O Series, so that you can enforce your tax policy really to any of the systems that the business chooses to use. And then process upgrades and ERP migration. We see that this is a great time as organizations transform the technology that they're using. It's a great time to introduce tax automation in that process, because if you're doing it at the time that you implement your ERP or you migrate your ERP, you're going to get a long-term investment with your tax implementation. If you're on a system and you're planning to change from that system, sometimes there'll be some rework that you would do with that migration. So if you're going through that transformation, this is a great time to introduce the automation, knowing that that's going to be a long-term investment. So with that, we kind of wanted to transition into what we see a lot of times. Businesses don't really have, or the tax teams within the businesses don't necessarily have a large voice for indirect tax and automation, right? They know that they need it, but they're not necessarily consulted. As the businesses make decisions, strategic decisions, maybe they enter new markets, or they react to the tariffs, they change their supply chain. The tax departments are very much reactive in terms of how to support that. So, regularly we have customers of ours, the indirect tax teams, that are wanting to justify the investment for tax automation. So we wanted to provide some insight into how we can help with that, and some things to look at to make sure that you're taking all the different things into consideration to support that. So I'll actually transition to Jess. She'll talk about how we can use some of these tools and this thought leadership from a partner perspective.
Excellent. Sorry, my mute was a little bit slow today. So as James mentioned, really, the cost justification around implementing a sales tax automation solution like Vertex can be a little bit tricky internally for a lot of your customers as you're going through this process, right? As James mentioned, it's typically the tax department, the finance teams that are really requiring this sort of automation. But a lot of times the budget lives in IT, which from a partner perspective, you're very used to that scenario. So it becomes very, very important that we look at the areas where a customer can get additional justification for this investment, because really what we're talking about is not necessarily a money generating activity. It's a protection against additional costs and fees going forward, right? We look at it as sort of cost avoidance as an organization implements a solution like this and protects them against more challenging issues that can come up. So things like efficiencies, right? Can you implement a solution like Vertex to allow your internal users to be redeployed to money generating activities, right? A lot of times the tax activities that are required are extremely mundane, right? Data entry, research, filing of returns, things like that. Can we redeploy those resources into other activities that do natively bring dollars into the organization, right, and be more strategic? Things like what kind of investment from a short-term and long-term perspective, right? So implementing a solution like Vertex for whatever capacity you want to leverage this solution, it can allow you to lower things like your reserve funds, right? We're able to help you become more accurate, more compliant, those types of things, so that additional resources that you need on the back end to protect yourself against things that could be happening through the processing of these orders becomes now something you can leverage. And if you think about that in terms of the overall project, sometimes the justifications can help reduce even some reserves that they have internally that would allow more money to be allocated to the project as a whole. So it's something to consider through the overall project as you think about, this as a holistic approach. And then why is it that this investment support a long-term interest? This is really about allowing the organization to grow. I don't think anybody, starts a business or gets into an industry to think we want to just stay exactly how we are going forward, right? And right now, organizations are growing at a rapid pace that I haven't seen before, right? Through mergers and acquisitions, people standing up online systems, things like that. It's great for business, right? It allows you to grow at a very rapid pace. And I think one of the things that gets lost in that shuffle is the tax implications that come as a result of it. So these justifications become extremely important. And James is going to walk us through something really cool, a tool that we have that can even help elevate those conversations internally and be able to help with that justification. So James, I'll kick that over to you.
Yeah, and absolutely. Sorry, Deb, if you could go back just wanted to reiterate on these different pieces, right? The first section I think is what everybody immediately looks at is how do we save time by investing in indirect tax automation? But the second two pieces become much more strategic, and I think that if you can have those conversations with the leadership, that's when they really start to gain momentum and they start to realize the impact that we can have, right? A lot of times businesses, don't really realize that, hey, we're setting a separate fund aside because we know we're not doing indirect tax correctly, and this is our safety net, right? If we can say that, hey, once we turn this automation on and we're using a superior system like Vertex, we can cut that reserve fund in half or a fraction of that. Now you can free up not just resources but money within the organization that they can repurpose, and I think that becomes a different way that they can look at this rather than this is just something we have to have, but instead this becomes a strategic component of our organization. And one thing, just a last point on this, is that with this tool and this justification process, this is something that we see both customers obviously wanting to leverage within Vertex, but also even partners, right? So as you're the trusted advisor of the customer that's implementing the ERP, that they need more robust functionality and process around indirect tax. How can we help that organization trust that or justify that? And I think that from a partner perspective, this becomes a great resource to help with that conversation. So what we're going to do here is just kind of go through this. This is again an internal tool that we've designed because we continue to get that request from our champions, within the organizations that we're selling to and we're offering Vertex with. They need help, justifying that. So what better way to do that than to take all this information, this data, put it through a tool that we can, streamline, make sure that we're covering all the different pieces, because every business is a little bit different. Not every business needs to automate, customer exemption certificates because they don't sell to exempt customers, right? So we need to make sure that we have a dynamic tool that's making sure we're going through all the different perspectives, and then provides a very robust and thorough analysis at the end that allows them to share with their leadership and is all relevant data to their organization. So this first one here, and this is a live scenario. This is actually for one of our D365 customers that wanted to do just what we're talking about here, provide that better, more detailed justification. And so the first high level key inputs that we'll capture is just what's the average sales tax rate. We have to have a baseline to understand what the liability is. What's the typical or anticipated error rate that they know that they have, their the total company revenue, and the number of invoices that were processed. So go ahead, Deb, to the next portion. So then we kind of detailed into the different areas that we know are in addition to just the total revenue and total sales tax. Something that not everybody thinks about are these penalties, interest and defense charges. Although every organization likely has them, right? So if you've dealt with an audit, you likely have had to pay some sort of penalty. With the penalty and interest, you probably had to pay for some sort of consulting and attorney fees, in order to help defend you. So we've captured that, as part of this analysis. And as we're capturing this data, we're also able to overlay our own formula based on our data that we know. Hey, how much time can Vertex save of that? In this particular case, we're able to provide, a pretty significant anticipated savings in any penalties and interest that they'll have to pay, because we can lower that error rate once Vertex is implemented. The next section is exemption certificates, and again, we may have a customer of ours that doesn't sell at all to exempt customers. So then this isn't a critical area. In this particular case, they were taking on roughly 7 exemption certificates a day. They have an error rate that they know, because this becomes manual entry within their system, and they have direct resource costs, right, of people that are having to review these, manage them, and enter that data in. So obviously one of the features Vertex offers is automation around these things. Let's provide the customer the ability to enter this information, and they'll provide technology that's going to validate and make sure that it's correct and indexed within the system, and then honored from a calculation perspective. So we're able to quickly, as we do this analysis with our information and knowing of our automated processes, we can monetarily tell the business in this case what they can see and what they can expect to save by implementing the automation around exemption certificates. And then the next slide here, we have AP invoicing and payment. Again, some businesses may be smaller, they may be very localized, and therefore they're only buying at one location. Not very complicated for AP on indirect tax. In this particular case, they were doing a vast number of invoices across multiple locations, and they knew they had a significant error rate. In some cases, they're actually overpaying tax to the vendors, right? So if they're able to implement a system that's able to detect, hey, you don't actually need to pay this tax to this vendor, it's less than that, we can ultimately save money. And so that's really what we're proposing here, with Vertex, showing again the monetary savings by implementing AP automation. Also something that can be skipped though if it's a company that doesn't have the complexities around AP automation. The next one is I believe AR automation here. Yep. So same thing, right? We know how much we're selling. There's an error rate associated to the sales tax that we're charging those customers. And there's also time spent around researching those regulatory changes. What are the tax rates in all these jurisdictions? And then how much are they changing as well? So we can provide monetary savings and an analysis here around, if we're able to automate that, avoid having to do all that manual research. Here's the typical savings that you could expect to see with Vertex. This one here is interesting. We've mentioned this earlier. So we know every organization, they're aware that there's a risk associated with indirect tax where they may not be doing it correctly, especially if they're doing it all manually, right? This particular organization had set on regular $150,000, a little over $150,000 in a safety fund, right? Because that's what they could expect to have to pay in penalties and interest. And we know based on our history with Vertex, we can lower that error rate from 0.5% to 0.1%, and then we can provide a suggested reserves reduction. In this case was $15,000. So they're saving a significant amount where they're able to reinvest that money into other areas of their organization. All right, and then filing and reporting. This goes back to how do we just save time? We know how many returns we're doing. We know how many resources are designated to those. In this case, it's costing the company around $45,000 a year. We can implement implementation at that point, then, is really just, lowering that cost of, $4,500, enabling those resources then to spend that time doing, more strategic analysis within that company. So in this particular case, they weren't looking to replace those resources. They really wanted to repurpose them within the organization. So that's again, another way to, look at this cost justification. And once we go through this tool, as the main thing to take away here is, we're going to force the organization to look at all of these different criteria that we know are important. They may not all be relevant, but we know that are important, and they may be overlooked when the individuals look to justify that cost. And as a result, we're also able to automatically build an executive summary. It's essentially a PDF that has more analytics in it than this is just a snippet of really what's available, but it's going to provide that high level type analysis that they can share with their leadership that really shows the value of automating that indirect tax and the strategy behind that. So this is available through Vertex. It's free to partners and customers. We just really ask for you to engage us. We'd be happy to kind of work through this exercise and really provide that thought leadership around that cost justification for tax automation, so that the voice within those organizations, the tax team within that organization, has that voice that they're looking for to be able to to get the support that they know that they need. And with that, we'd really just like to kind of complete with making sure you're aware Vertex does offer an end-to-end solution for indirect tax. And as we mentioned, obviously most people come to us, hey, we need help calculating and managing the rates of sales tax, the calculations of VAT, right? That's typically the biggest driver, but know that there's really more to your needs and more to the Vertex system, whether it be address validation, economic nexus monitoring. We talked about exemption certificate, as well as reporting and filing. And so you can really, depending on the business and your needs, you may not need all of these. It's a la carte. You can kind of pick and choose what part of the automation you want, but know that Vertex offers the full end-to-end suite for your indirect tax processes. All right, with that, I'll transition it back to Jess.
Sure. So just to kind of level set and to really kind of summarize where we've been in terms of this conversation, I think one of the areas that we really focused on was the business justifications around an investment in a product like Vertex in terms of automating these tax processes. And as partners of ours and as folks hopefully that we'll work with in the future, hopefully you're starting to see that it's not just as simple as do you automate or do you not automate. There's a lot of elements that come into play here that are expensive and cumbersome and can be really problematic for organizations. And that justification, it becomes very, very important, especially when organizations are trying to figure out if this makes sense for them. And so, like James said, we have resources available to you as our partners, as customers of ours, to help you in those justifications. Because as you can see, if we are engaged with you and are able to do this really well, not only can we alleviate some of these cumbersome practices and get some of these resources reallocated to other money generating activities, but we may even be able to save you money, which could allow for other projects that are on your docket to now come to the forefront and have the funding available to be able to do that, right? So this is a great opportunity for us to try to help not only with the tax elements of this process, but also the overall project as a whole, right? Can we help allocate funding in other areas to be able to, to alleviate an expense for something else that might be really important. So keep that in mind as you think about these projects. We're here to help going forward. Deb, let's go to the next slide. We talk a lot about meeting our partners where they are, right? And that means a lot of different things to us. But one of them, very simply, is we're going a lot of places, right? We want to be where the cool kids are in the Microsoft space. Who's talking about Dynamics? And so you can see here, these are the list of activities and places we'll be that are already ready to rock and roll for this year. We'll be in Chicago next week for Dynamics Con. So if you are going to be there, we've got some ways that you can connect with us. We'd love to talk to you about all things tax, Dynamics, and even recommendations for good places to eat while we're there. But you can see we're going internationally and all those things. We'll be at booth 618. You can feel free to stop by or use this QR code. We can set up a demo. You can even use this as an opportunity to walk through the cost justification program that we have. James and Mark, who'll be there, can help us walk through that. So please, if you're going to be there, we'd love to chat with you. And then we always want you to connect with us. So as next steps, we've given you a lot of options in terms of ways to connect with us. First and easy enough is to follow us. We're constantly posting to LinkedIn with updated information. Use that email address to contact this group. Consider us a resource for you. You can book a demo at any point. We love to walk through our product with you. Always, if you aren't a Vertex partner, please reach out to me. I would love to have that conversation with you. Obviously, we're not a fit for everybody, but we are a fit for most. I think we've come to market with products and services and support that's really made for the dynamic space. So please reach out to us. We'll talk about partnering with us. And then our team is extremely proud that you can transact with us on the marketplace coming soon. So keep that in mind. Look out for us. We can leverage that technology to help get these projects underway. With that, thank you again for joining us. We appreciate the time. And as always, this team is here to support our partners and customers to reach out to us at any point.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And there was some excellent sections in there around some of the drivers of tax complexity. Just as a reminder, this is absolutely a global solution. And I think as Vertex quite capably illustrated there, they work absolutely hand in glove with Microsoft and their sellers as well. So do have a think about your use cases, have a think about the current clients you're working with. And if they are seeing challenges tied to the same kind of volatility, even if it's not a tax situation, then this is a solution that they might bring some value. So definitely have the conversation. They've got their email on screen at the moment. We've got maybe a minute or two for any questions if anyone does have any. Just from my side, I think what are the main sort of drivers or industry trends are you guys seeing? Microsoft partners and end customers kind of coming to you with top of mind.
I would say one of the biggest questions we're getting obviously is around the tariffs. And I think James really illustrated that well, because tariffs aren't an indirect tax, they're a direct tax, but it does have a ripple effect throughout the course of the organization that can impact things like how you're purchasing products and things like that. So it's always a conversation we want to have if it's something you're worried about, even if, like I said, the system isn't set up to manage tariffs specifically. It is set up to help in some of the areas that will be impacted based on those. So that's one of the other things that comes up a lot. And I also think, people doing business differently, right? Setting up an online store, a website and things like that expands your ability to sell all over the place. Mergers and acquisitions are huge. Right now, we're seeing that constantly with companies adding on. So all of those things are great for business, like I said, but have a tax implication that if you're not ready for it can kind of sneak up and bite you in the butt. So, we always recommend when those things start to happen, reach out to us. We can help talk with your customers, talk with your teams internally to help figure out what is best to do there.
Jess, I would just add to that as well from a VAT perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Companies really that are either have or creating a complex supply chain, right? So if you're selling to just one European country, not a huge need for a solution like Vertex. But if you're selling to multiple countries and you're fulfilling either through subsidiaries or you're fulfilling through other vendors to drop ship, really complicates the points that you need to rely on to determine the VAT that needs to be calculated. And that's something that the Vertex solutions streamline to support.
Yeah. Good point.
Brilliant. Nice. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again if you are viewing live, and if you are watching this on demand, please do feel free to reach out either to the emails on screen or to myself, rlun@seer365.com, and I'd be happy to put you in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.